Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're really going to dig into something that's been all over the news lately. Homelessness in Canada. Especially with those recent comments from Premier Ford here in Ontario.
Yeah, those definitely got people talking. And we've got a lot to unpack today, some news articles to see what's actually happening out there, and even a whole policy proposal someone sent us that claims to have answers. Should be interesting.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in with Premier Ford, shall we? He really didn't hold back with that get off your ace and work comment. Got a lot of attention, to say the least.
It did. It did. And look, while that sparked a whole debate, I think it's important to remember what else was going on when he said that.
Good point. It's not like it came out of nowhere.
Oh.
The articles you sent, they paint a picture of some Ontarians being, well, frankly, fed up. Encampments popping up in parks they used to go to with their families, discarded needles, that kind of thing. Not hard to see why that caused some anxiety.
Right, and Ford's tapping into that. But then you've got Mayor Chow in Toronto coming at it from a whole other angle. She's all about the bigger picture. We've got a housing crisis, shelters are overflowing, and on top of that, a wave of refugees needing help too. It's a lot to handle.
It really is. And just to throw some numbers out there, because this one really hit me, 12,000 people in Toronto shelters right now. And get this, half of them are refugee claimants. That says a lot about how strained things are.
It does. She's how everything's connected, you know? Can't talk about homelessness without housing costs, mental health support, even immigration policies. It's all tangled up.
Like trying to untangle a giant knot, almost.
And here's the kicker. Both Ford and Chow, they seem to agree on one thing. Nobody actually wants to be living in an encampment.
So then the question becomes, if nobody wants that, why is it still happening? Like, what's at the root of all this?
Exactly. Because we could talk all day about how bad it is, but you also sent me this policy proposal, right? T.R.I.P, the Treatment and Reintegration Program, claims to have some real solutions.
Yeah. Before we get to that, though, what are Ford and Chow actually suggesting we do about all this? Besides just, all levels of government need to work together, which sounds great, but
Yeah.
what does that even mean in practice?
Well, Ford's pushing for exactly that collaboration. Not a lot of concrete plans yet, though. And Chow's mentioned that rent supplement program, the Canada-Ontario one, which is supposed to help low-income folks afford rent, and is finally up and running again after being on hold. No guarantees it'll make a dent in homelessness specifically, though.
Okay, so we've got calls for teamwork, but no game plan yet. And a program that might help people keep their housing, but no promises it'll get people off the streets in the first place. Sounds like we need to dig a little deeper, wouldn't you say?
100%. And that's what makes this TRIP thing so intriguing. It's trying to get past the vague ideas and actually lay out a plan.
And it's not just coming from some think tank, right? This is from someone who's been on the front lines of this.
Absolutely. Joanne Gomez, the author, she's a registered nurse, over 20 years in intensive care units, so she's seen firsthand what this crisis does to people.
Okay, now that's what I call credibility. So we've got worried citizens, politicians trying to wrangle a complex problem, and someone with firsthand experience saying, hey, here's how we could fix this. Let's dive into this TRIP proposal and see what they're suggesting.
All right, let's do it. And remember how we were talking about root causes? Well, that's a big part of what TRIP is all about.
You were saying this TRIP proposal, it's all about the root causes. What's that actually mean, though, in this case? Seems like one of those phrases that gets thrown around but could mean a million different things.
Oh, for sure. And it'd be easy to just say, well, they're homeless, so the root cause is no housing, right? But this proposal, it goes deeper. It's talking about poverty, mental health stuff, addiction, past trauma. Heck, even just not having people to rely on can make someone way more vulnerable to ending up on the streets.
So it's less about getting them into a home, more about figuring out why they didn't have one to begin with.
Exactly. And that's where the 6-step program they lay out comes in. Tries to tackle things from all those angles.
Right, hit me with it. Step 1.
So step 1 is probably going to ruffle some feathers. They're talking legislative reform.
Whoa, okay. Now we're getting serious. Changing the law. What's the thinking there?
See, Gomez, the author, she argues that right now, if someone's a danger to themselves or to others, like because of severe mental illness or addiction, but they're not like an immediate threat, there's not much we can do. This proposal, it says in those extreme cases, we need to be able to get them into treatment, even if they don't want it.
Oof. Yeah, that's going to be controversial. Because on the one hand, you don't want to force people into anything, but then on the other, if someone's really in crisis, isn't there an argument to be made for stepping in?
And that's the debate, right? Gomez, she's saying we've got a duty to care for the most vulnerable, even when they can't or won't care for themselves. But She also says, anytime you're talking about making someone do something, there need to be a lot of safeguards in place. Oversight, ways to appeal it, all that.
It makes sense, trying to strike a balance, protecting people's rights
Hmm.
while still, making sure they don't fall through the cracks.
Yes.
So let's say they clear that legal hurdle. What's next?
Step 2 is where things get really interesting. They want to create these specialized facilities all across Canada. And we're not just talking your average homeless shelter here.
Oh, now you got my attention. Paint me a picture. What are we talking?
So picture this, a place could house maybe a couple hundred people. Okay. All the basics are there, beds, food, showers. But then you layer on top of that medical care, mental health professionals, all in the same place. And it's not just about the bare necessities either. Think common spaces, workshops, maybe even art studios, gardens, trying to rebuild a sense of community, giving people something to do, not just a roof and a meal.
It sounds almost like, I don't know, a self-contained community where people can get back on their feet, but with a support system built right in.
Exactly. And that whole community aspect, it comes up again later in step 5, which is all about mentorship. But we'll get to that. For now, back to these facilities.
So we've got the law change, the housing situation. What's next on the list?
All right. So within these facilities, step 3 is all about detox and mental health support, but for real this time.
Makes sense. Got to address the addiction and mental health stuff that's often playing a role. What's their plan for that?
First off, medically supervised detox. They make a big point that going cold turkey on the streets, super dangerous.
Yeah, not exactly a recipe for success. Heard some horror stories about that, actually.
And beyond just getting people off whatever substances, they're also saying, look, homelessness and mental health, they go hand in hand a lot of the time. So they want on-site psychiatric evaluations, individual therapy, group stuff, the whole 9 yards, help people work through whatever they've been through.
So it's not just, here's a bed, don't do drugs. It's actually addressing the reasons behind those things.
Yeah.
Okay, starting to see how this is all fitting together.
Yeah.
But what about the whole getting people back on their feet, able to hold down a job, all that?
You're on a roll. That's step 4. Tailored care and vocational training.
Okay, break that down for me.
So tailored care, that just means recognizing that everyone's different, right? Some folks, they might need a lot of structure at first. Others are going to do better with more independence. This program, it stresses being flexible, meeting people where they're at.
I like that. No one-size-fits-all approach. What about the training part? What are they envisioning there?
Basically, giving people the skills to support themselves. Could be vocational programs, education, learning a trade, maybe even just brushing up on basic literacy or life skills. Remember how we talked about those numbers, like 25,000 to 35,000 people homeless on any given night in Canada? Their argument is a lot of these folks, they want to work, they just don't have what they need to compete.
It's that saying, right? Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach him to fish, you feed him for life. This feels like the teaching part.
Love that analogy. And that leads perfectly into step 5, which is mentorship. They're really big on the long-term support structure.
All right, 5 steps in. Lay it on me. What's the mentorship angle?
So imagine this, someone goes through this whole T.R.I.P program, right? They get back on their feet, things are good. They can actually choose to stay on as a mentor themselves, help guide the new people, share their experiences, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow, that's actually really cool. Like support from the professionals is one thing, but having someone who's been there, that could be huge. Builds in this whole other level of, I don't know, understanding and support. But eventually the goal is to get people back out into the world, right? Can't stay in the program forever.
Exactly. Which brings us to step 6, reintegration. And T.R.I.P, they're adamant that this can't just be an afterthought.
So what's a good reintegration look like then? What needs to be in place for it to actually work?
Think ongoing support. Job placement help, finding an apartment, still having access to therapy or support groups, all that. The idea is to set people up for lasting success, not just send them back out there and hope for the best.
It's one thing to survive, another thing entirely to actually thrive. This is aiming for thriving.
Exactly.
Okay, I gotta admit, it's a pretty comprehensive plan. But now the big question, do they think it'll actually work? So we've gone through all 6 steps now, changing laws, building these special facilities, dealing with addiction and mental health head-on, job training, the mentorship thing, and making sure people don't just end up back on the street after all that. Ambitious is one word for it. But do they actually give us reasons to believe it could work? That's the thing.
Right. Anyone can say they have a solution, but the proof is in the pudding, as they say. And to be fair, this is just one proposal, not some magic wand. But what I do like is they don't just tell us what to do, they spend a lot of time on the why. Back it up with research and stuff.
Okay, convince me. Why does TRIP think this whole thing would actually make a difference?
Well, it all goes back to those root causes we keep talking about, right? It's easy to slap a Band-Aid on things like, oh, here's a bed for the night, problem solved. But this proposal, it argues that's just ignoring the real issues. The trauma, the mental health stuff, addiction, you don't just get over that overnight.
It's like you keep putting a Band-Aid on a cut that needs stitches, you know?
Yeah.
Not going to do much good in the long run.
Exactly. And that's where these whole specialized facility things come in. It's about creating an environment where people actually have a chance to address those deeper issues. They're safe, they've got support, professionals around who know what they're doing.
So kind of a hand up, not just a handout.
There you go. And remember how we talked about the examples they give? Programs in other places that have worked. They're not just saying this is a nice idea, they're pointing to actual evidence.
Because anyone can talk a good game.
Right.
Show me the receipts.
Right. And here's another argument they make, which I thought was interesting. They say, this isn't just the right thing to do morally, it's also the smart move financially.
Oh, now you've really got my attention. Break that down for me.
Think about it. Every ER visit, every night in a shelter, police having to get involved, all that costs money, right? Their argument is, if you invest in this program up front, you might actually save money in the long run.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or however that goes.
Exactly. But of course, a program this big, it's going to take a lot of commitment, right? Money, resources, all levels of government on board. They're not naive about that.
Which kind of brings us back to Premier Ford and Mayor Chow, doesn't it? Clearly, they both see homelessness as a problem, but would they be willing to go this far? This isn't exactly business as usual.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, this proposal, it lays out a roadmap, but it's up to those in charge and, frankly, all of us to decide if we're going to actually take that road.
One thing's for sure, ignoring the problem isn't going to make it go away. Something else that got me thinking, they talk about looking at other places, seeing what's worked. Made me wonder, if you were in charge of fixing this, where would you even start looking? What can we learn from others who are tackling this, maybe even doing it well?
That's a great question. And I think that's what's so great about these deep dives, We're not giving you all the answers, just hopefully giving you the info you need to start asking the right questions yourself.
Couldn't have said it better. From Premier Ford's, shall we say, interesting choice of words, all the way to a whole plan for how to actually change things. That's what I call a deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this one, folks. Keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and most importantly, keep the conversation going.